Hello again, everyone. Tonight's story is about a grieving father, his brave little girl, and the three orc sisters already living in that cabin he bought. Because sometimes a stolen home, a shared fire, and one stubborn heart can become the beginning of a family no registry could ever really erase.
The wagon climbed the last mile, as if every stone in the mountain had been placed there to test the patience of tired horses and men who had mistaken cheap land for mercy. Elias Vale kept one hand on the reins and the other near his daughter's knee, not touching, only ready, because Mara had a habit of leaning toward whatever interested her, and the drop beyond the left wheel had become too steep for a father's calm to remain honest. Pines crowded the track. Snow lay in old blue patches under them, though the lower valley had already entered spring. He had not come here for adventure or escape or any grand refusal of the world. He had simply run out of rooms where the past did not sit in the chair across from him. The registry clerk in Westmere had shown him a remote cabin, unoccupied, unsurveyed beyond the old claim lines, half the price of a town room for a year, and Elias had signed because the word unoccupied sounded less like loneliness than quiet. Mara pressed her nose to the cold side of the wagon. Papa, smoke. He saw it then, a thin blue thread lifting above the ridge. The cabin appeared a moment later, tucked into a clearing that had been cut with care rather than greed. The roof was low, patched in 3 places with cedar shingles of different ages. Firewood stood beneath the lean-to in clean, even ranks. A repaired fence held back the goat tracks near the door. The window facing the road had a newer frame than the others, planed smooth and fitted tight. It was not an abandoned cabin. Abandoned houses sagged in the corners first, like people pretending not to be weary. This place had been argued with, mended, kept. Maybe someone stopped for the storm. Mara said, though no storm had yet begun. Maybe. Elias answered, because fathers sometimes placed soft cloth over sharp truths until they knew where to set them. The door opened before the wagon reached the yard. A woman stepped out with a draw knife in one hand and a strip of pale cedar in the other. She was orc, tall enough that the lintel had been cut with her height in mind, and broad through the shoulder in the way of someone whose strength had been earned without display. Her skin was a deep mountain green, warmed with brown, not bright, not dull, the color of moss after rain. Her black hair was braided close and pinned at the nape. She wore wool and hide, and no ornament except a small iron nail tucked behind one ear. Her hands were what Elias noticed first after her eyes, wide-palmed, square-fingered, dense over the knuckles, where old scars had healed in pale green lines, yet unexpectedly smooth along the inside of the wrist where the draw-knife handle had worn the skin like oiled wood. Sawdust clung to her fingers. A woman with hands like that did not merely occupy a place. She held it together. "This is occupied," she said. Elias stopped the wagon. The horse lowered her head and steamed into the cold. The registry listed it empty. Behind the eldest orc, 2 more women came into view. The middle one had amber eyes and a healer's satchel at her hip, her jaw set as if she had been born with an argument ready and had spent her life making it accurate. The youngest stood half in shadow, lighter green and freckled, her gaze going at once to Mara rather than Elias. The middle sister glanced at the folded deed in Elias's breast pocket. Human registry. Yes. Then it would say empty. The eldest slid the draw-knife into her belt. "I am Thara. This cabin is not empty." "I can see that," Elias said, and the apology in it was not enough, but it was what his hands could reach. "I'm Elias. This is my daughter Mara." At the child's name, the middle sister's eyes narrowed. Mara is an orc name. It was her mother's grandmother's name. He had not meant to say it so quickly. The words came out like something dropped from a shelf. His left hand closed once around the ring he still wore, then opened. The youngest orc stepped forward with a basket of kindling over one arm. "I am Sella," she said softly. Mara lifted one mittened hand. Sella lifted hers back after a pause, as if she were answering a bird call. The middle sister folded her arms. I am Mira. If you came to remove us, you brought too few men and too much child. I didn't come to remove anyone. That is what men say before finding a sheriff. There is no sheriff within 40 miles. Then you bought inconvenient land. Mira, Thara said, and one word from her carried the clean pressure of a clamp, tightened at just the right point. She looked from the wagon to the sky, where weather was gathering behind the pines. Unload your food before it freezes. Paper can wait until after soup. He could have insisted on the deed. Men had done worse with less paper. Instead, he looked at the firewood, the repaired frame, the smoke rising from a chimney someone had remortared by hand, and knew that if ownership meant anything here, it had calluses. I have flour, he said. Beans, salt pork, apples if my daughter has not eaten them all. 5 apples, Mara confessed. One was getting bruised. Mira made a sound that might have become laughter if she had not strangled it. Sella's attention warmed at the word apples. Thara nodded once. Bring them in. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke, wool, riverstone, dried herbs, iron, and stew. The room was one large space arranged by use. Hearth on one side, table under the new framed window, shelves along the back wall, ladder to a loft where blankets hung over the rail. Elias saw repairs everywhere. The hearthstones were old, but the mortar between them had been dug out and set fresh, thumb-smoothed but not prettied. The floor near the threshold had been patched where meltwater would have rotted it. A roof brace above the loft had been fitted recently with pegs driven true. He had spent his life as a cooper, teaching wood to hold water by respecting its grain. He recognized labor the way another man might recognize family. He set down the first crate and nearly reached for a second cup when Mira poured tea, though there was only one cup in front of him. The habit was old and treacherous. He withdrew his hand before it touched the empty place, but Thara saw. She seemed to see the places where people stopped themselves. Mara did not. Mara was watching Sella place the 5 apples in a dark wooden bowl as if each one had a rank and title. Quick note before we continue. If you want hotter and uncensored orc-bound fantasy romance stories, I'll be sharing them on my Patreon page. These are the deeper and more intense scenes I can't post here, so check the description for details. The first night was not hospitality. It was triage. Thara pointed where the food should go. Mira inspected each bundle with the suspicion of someone who had learned that gifts often concealed hooks, and Sella found a smaller blanket for Mara without meeting Elias's eyes. The stew was stretched with his beans and salt pork. Apples were sliced so thin that everyone had a piece. Mara sat on the bench with both hands around her bowl, studying the sisters as if trying to place them into the shape of her future before the adults could make a mess of it. Do orcs like apples? She asked Sella. Yes. Red ones or green ones? Yes. That means both, Mara informed Elias. I understood. You say that when you didn't. Mira's mouth twitched. The child has evidence. Elias drank Mira's bitter tea and found it tasted of willow bark and pepper. What is this for? Cold, Mira said, and stupidity. Is stupidity cured by tea? No, but the symptoms are quieter. Mara laughed into her bowl. The sound startled Elias so badly that he looked at her. He had not forgotten she could laugh, but some sounds become rare enough in a house of grief that when they return, they seem to have arrived from another country. After supper, he rose when Thara lifted the pot. Their hands met on the iron handle. Her skin was warmer than his, not feverish, but banked with heat like stone near a hearth. The side of her thumb brushed his knuckle, dense and smooth where tools had polished it, and he felt the contact with an attention that embarrassed him. He let go first. I clean my own, he said. This was a shared meal. I still clean. You scrub cast iron with ash, not sand. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. Show me. So he did. He worked ash and hot water into the blackened pot until the grease lifted and the seasoning remained. Thara watched his hands the entire time. It was not flirtation. It was worse, or better. It was recognition. A person who watched how you worked could learn what you respected, what you rushed, what you lied about. Acceptable, she said. Mira leaned back. Praise, he may faint. They slept near the hearth because the loft belonged to the sisters. Mara fell asleep quickly with a carved wooden goat Sella had set beside her bedroll. Elias lay awake, listening to the cabin settle under wind. Above him, the loft boards made 3 different kinds of sound. Mira quick and restless, Sella light as if apologizing to the wood, Thara slow because she knew which boards complained. Near dawn he woke to a soft shaving noise. Thara sat by the window, mending a chair leg in lamplight, her hair unbound over one shoulder, the chair upside down across her knees. She shaved a peg, tested it, shaved again, never forcing the joint. You should sleep, she said without looking up. So should you. The chair cracked. Did it announce this? No. Then how did you know? Now she looked at him. I listened to my house. My house. Not a challenge, not a boast, the exact weight of the truth. I'm sorry, he said, for buying paper, for arriving with it. Thara pressed the peg into the joint and tested the angle with her palm. Paper arrives often. Men arrive less often. Men with children, less. She turned the chair upright. You looked at the hearth before you looked at me. A man coming to take a house looks first at who he must remove. A man needing shelter looks at fire. Elias stared at the coals. I needed quiet. You came with a 6-year-old. That was the flaw in the plan. For the first time, something like humor touched her mouth and vanished. Sleep. By morning, snow had swallowed the road. Ownership for the moment was buried under weather. Thara and Elias cleared the roof with long poles while Mira and Sella kept Mara inside, though the child pressed her face to the window and shouted advice through the glass. Elias struck the lean-to roof too low, and Thara corrected him at once. Above the beam. Wider stance. Use legs, not shoulders. I was a cooper, he said, shifting his grip. Not a roofer. Barrels, casks, tubs, anything with staves. Good work if done well. Leaky work if not. Then do this well. He did better. When snow slid down in a white sheet and missed his boots by inches, Thara nodded as if she had hammered approval into place. It should not have pleased him. It did. The storm held them 3 days. On the 3rd morning, after breakfast, the speaking began. The 5 of them sat around the table because practical people did not decide the shape of a life while standing in doorways. Thara rested both hands on the scarred wood. Those hands changed the room when they stilled. In daylight he saw again the map of work on them, the pale line at the base of one thumb, the small burn near her wrist, the blunt nails, the calluses placed exactly where hammer, axe, knife, and plane had asked the skin to harden. Elias had known men who talked ownership with soft palms. He had never trusted them. Our mother's brother cut the first beams, Thara said. Our mother set the hearth. I replaced the north wall after rot. Mira keeps fever from killing us. Sella keeps the spring clear and grows what deer do not steal. Mira added, the ridge was no one's until humans drew lines on it. Then it was crown land, then abandoned claim, then auction parcel, then yours, because a clerk looked at an orc roof and saw empty air. I paid very little, Elias said. Cheap means someone else already paid, Mira replied. He looked at the hearth, the brace above the loft, the floorboards near the door, and knew she had not spoken metaphor. When the road clears, Mara and I can leave. Mara turned sharply. Papa. Thara watched the child, then him. Where? He had no answer that did not sound like another rented room, another town where people spoke gently until grief made them bored, another narrow bed with Mara curled against him because the world below had become too loud. He had not fled the valley in a blaze of sorrow. He had simply let himself be carried out of it by exhaustion. I don't know, he said. Thara leaned back. We do not leave. I understand. No, you hear. Understanding takes longer. Mara placed one apple seed on the table apart from the others. Can we all stay? It's bigger than the room above the baker. It is not big, Mira said. Bigger than that room. Many cupboards are bigger than human town rooms. Sella has a goat, Mara added, as if this completed the law. One goat, Sella said. Does it bite? Yes. I still like it. Thara's gaze moved over them all, not soft, not yielding, but measuring what could bear weight. This is now our shared home. The words struck Elias more deeply than if she had shouted. He had expected refusal, accusation, perhaps a demand for coin. Shared home was heavier. It required him to become real inside the sentence. Shared how? He asked. Work shared, food counted and shared, decisions spoken before done, no selling, no sheriff, no registry men inside without consent. Mira said, No pity, no touching my stores without asking, no teaching the child that orcs are mountain ghosts or bedtime warnings. I wouldn't. Men do many things they would not. Sella looked at Mara. No cutting the rowan below the spring. I don't know which tree that is, Elias said. I will show you, Sella replied, and Mara whispered, Me too. Sella paused, then nodded. When the snow is lower. So the household began, not with warmth, but with the rearrangement of weight. His flour joined theirs. His salt pork hung beside smoked meat. His tools were unwrapped and inspected by Thara with the first clear approval he had seen from her. A woven screen was hung near the hearth to give him and Mara a corner that was not privacy exactly, but less exposure. That afternoon he opened the box of cooking things and found the bundle of rosemary tied with faded blue thread. The scent began to rise, and he closed the lid before it could fill the room. Later he found the box moved to a dry shelf, unopened, saved from damp. Thara had done it. He knew by the square way it sat, aligned with the shelf edge. The child bridged what the adults could not. By the end of the week, Mara had learned that Sella could whistle through her tusks to call the goat. Bracken, who bit everyone with impartial conviction. Sella showed Mara how to hold grain on a flat palm. Mara yelped when Bracken nipped her fingers and looked betrayed. He bites everyone, Sella said. Even you. Yes. Why keep him? He gives milk. Also, he is too rude to die. Mara nodded gravely. I know people like that. Mira, passing through the doorway, said, So do I, and looked at Elias. When the snow lowered, Sella took Mara to the hidden garden on the south slope. Elias followed at a distance, close enough to be a father, far enough to let trust find its own footing. The garden lay behind stones, arranged so naturally he would have missed it. Under straw and willow frames, black earth waited. Sella brushed snow aside with bare fingers and showed Mara markers made from bone and split twigs. What grows? Mara asked. Mountain onion, sorrel, fever root, blue beans if frost is kind, flowers if I am foolish. Why foolish? Flowers feed eyes, not bellies. Mara crouched beside her. Eyes get hungry. Sella looked at the child for a long time. Yes, she said, and after that Mara saved bright things for her. A jay feather, a moon-shaped button from her old coat, a piece of mica that held light even on grey days. Sella placed each on the garden stones with grave care, and Elias understood that his daughter was not performing cuteness for lonely women. She was doing what children do when adults are too afraid to begin. She was laying small bridges and walking over them first. Mira tested Elias with a healer's fairness, which was to say without mercy but also without lies. She made him identify jars by smell, and corrected him when he confused feverfew with tansy. When Mara spilled dried yarrow and froze in terror, Elias knelt at once and began gathering the leaves without raising his voice. Expensive spill, Mira said. Mara's lip trembled. Then we'll be careful picking it up, Elias replied. Mira watched him, then knelt too. Fear wastes more than yarrow. She swept leaves into her palm with a bone knife. Remember that. Are you mad? Mara whispered. Yes. At me? At gravity. Mara considered this. Gravity is always doing things. Exactly. That was how Mira's kindness arrived, disguised as irritation so thoroughly that it could survive being offered. Another small allegiance formed over a fever that never quite became one. Mara woke one wet morning hot-cheeked and stubborn, insisting she was not ill because ill people stayed in bed, and she had promised Sella to check the beans. Mira put the back of 2 fingers to the child's throat, then to her own, comparing heat with the exactness of a scale. Bed, she said. This is injustice. Mara protested. Yes, Mira answered, already measuring leaves into a cup. Many illnesses are politically disappointing. Elias sat beside the bedroll and tried not to count breaths the way he had once counted them in another room, with another woman, when every pause seemed to open under him like ice. Mira caught his stare, and without softness said, "Let the kettle speak first." The phrase was so close to one his wife had used on restless mornings that Elias flinched before he could prevent it. Thara, across the room, looked up from sharpening a chisel. Mira noticed the flinch too, and for once did not press her advantage. She only set the cup in his hand. Hold this. Fathers shaking near sick children are useless furniture. Mara recovered by evening and complained that everyone had made her drink leaf water for nothing. But Sella brought the wooden goat to her pillow, Mira left a honeyed strip of bark beside the cup, and Thara repaired the loose slat in the woven screen so quietly that Elias did not hear the work until it was done. With Thara the change came through work. If Elias carried a beam, she appeared at the other end. If he set a tool where damp could reach it, she moved it and said nothing, which was worse than scolding. When he repaired the loose threshold, she crouched beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, and placed the correct wedge in his palm. Not that one. They're the same. They are not. That one splits old wood. This one lifts. You saw that from across the room? I saw you choosing wrong from across the room. That must be difficult for you. Yes. He almost laughed. She took the hammer from his hand, drove the wedge with 3 precise strikes, and returned it handle first. You were about to hit too hard. I had not hit yet. You were thinking loudly. No one had ever accused him of that. Grief had made him quiet enough that people called him calm because they did not know the difference between still water and frozen water. Yet Thara noticed the pressure before the strike. That unsettled him more than her strength. The window frame became their next lesson in proximity. The new pine around the south window had begun to swell with damp. Not enough to fail, only enough to make the shutter stick. Elias noticed it after breakfast and found Thara already there with a plane, because of course she had noticed it first. She handed him the tool without ceremony. "Take less than pride once," she said. He ran the plane once along the edge and shaved too deeply at the corner. Thara caught his wrist. Her grip was not hard, but it was absolute, a vice with judgment. Wood remembers insults. "So do you," he said. "Yes." She set his hand again and guided the plane with him, her body close behind his shoulder, her breath steady, her hands enclosing the motion until he felt not controlled, but included in a discipline older than either of them. In the grey window light he saw the texture of her fingers in detail. Fine, pale scars across the knuckles, a thickened pad beneath the index finger from years of knife pressure, the crescent scar near her thumb where some blade had slipped and been forgiven only because the hand had survived. Yet when she brushed shavings from the sill, the movement was gentle enough not to disturb dust. Mara, watching from the table, asked, "Does the window feel better now?" Thara considered the question with more seriousness than most adults gave children. "It will open without pain." Mara nodded. "That is better." Elias looked at the repaired joint, at Thara's hands resting on the sill, and thought that some people did not know how to speak comfort except by making a thing work again. One evening Mara stood before the door frame while Thara marked her height with charcoal. Older marks climbed the same frame. 3 sets of Orc script Elias could not read. The sisters recorded there as children becoming women under a roof no registry had ever acknowledged. "Why?" Mara asked. "To prove to the door that you grow?" Thara said, "Can Papa have a mark? He is too late." "For growing?" "For proving it to the door." Mara leaned against Thara's leg without thinking. Elias saw Thara go still. Her hand hovered above the child's cap, not recoiling, not taking cheaply, waiting until the permission became clear. Then she touched Mara's head with 2 fingers. Mara looked up. "Are you going to be my new mother?" The question went through the room like a dropped blade. Mira's knife stopped. Sella shut her eyes. Elias felt cold move under his ribs. He wanted to pull the child back from the truth she had said, but that would teach her that longing was shameful. Thara looked at Mara, then at him. The silence lasted long enough for the fire to become loud. "No," Thara said. Mara's face fell. Thara continued, each word cut carefully. "Not mother. There is another word first." "What word?" Mara asked. Mira set down the knife and wiped her hands with the care of someone preparing to read law aloud. When she spoke, her voice was flat and exact, stripped of teasing. "Among the hill clans, when a man of age shares the hearth of unmarried women of one blood house through winter, takes food by their fire, gives work to their roof, shelters a child beneath their beams, and neither leaves by his will nor is cast out by theirs, he stands under household claim. If the women name him guest, he remains guest. If they name him burden, he leaves when weather permits. If they name him hearth-bound, he is owed food and owes work. If the eldest names him husband and the sisters do not refuse, the law of our mothers recognizes him as husband to the house, whether or not human ink agrees." The room held the words like a bowl filled too high. Elias looked at Thara. Beneath her stillness he saw something braced so tightly it might have been mistaken for indifference. Wanting, in some people, looked like reaching. In Thara, it looked like standing very still and expecting pain. "You are explaining custom," he said to Mira. "I am explaining consequence," she replied. "So you cannot claim ignorance later. Has she named me?" Thara's jaw shifted. "No." Mara frowned. "Do you want to?" "Mara," Elias said softly. Thara answered anyway. "Not yet." Those 2 words did more than yes could have done. Yes might have been storm pressure, winter madness, a custom colliding with need. Not yet contained time. A door not open, but not barred. Elias did not object. He did not laugh. He did not rise. He sat with the words until they settled into him like a beam finding its notch. Mira leaned back. There. Factual terror accomplished. Mara, satisfied by what she understood and untroubled by the rest, said, "So Papa is maybe a husband later." "Your child is dangerous," Mira told him. "She gets that from her mother," Elias said, and the sentence came before he could soften it. It hurt, but it did not break him. Thara's gaze dropped to the ring on his hand, and then moved away. After that, nothing became simple. It became careful. Elias noticed Thara everywhere, not in the hungry way of a young man, but with the unwilling precision of someone whose life had been built around not wanting and had found want living quietly in the doorway. She placed food near his elbow when he fed Mara from his bowl. She sharpened his draw knife after seeing it catch and returned it without comment. When Mira brewed something punishing for his cough, Thara set it beside his bedroll and stood there until he drank. "It tastes like a boot dyed in a swamp," he said. "Mira says that means it works." "Mira says many things." "Yes." The care in their not touching became its own touch. The porch became usable as spring warmed. One night after Mara slept, and Mira's jars had stopped clinking, and Sella had returned from the garden, Elias stepped outside for air. Thara came out with a leather strap to mend, and sat at the far end of the bench. The board dipped under her weight, carrying the motion to him. I went to the registry once, she said after a long silence. After our mother died, I took pelts. Good ones. I thought payment made men listen. He waited. They said the cabin could not be entered as ours because no crown surveyor had marked the first structure, and no Orc kinship line could hold deed without imperial witness, and no witness would come without road access, and road access required an approved deed. She pulled thread through leather. A circle built from ink. What did you do? Sold the pelts. Bought nails. Of course she had. Elias looked at the roofline she had kept alive because law refused to see it. I'm sorry. You apologize for many things other men did. I'm the one here. That is not the same. She tested the mend. Your paper can harm us. Yes. You could still use it. Yes. Will you? Through the window he could see Mara asleep, with one arm over the blanket, the wooden goat near her cheek. He could see Sella's shadow near the shelves, Mira's satchel hanging by the door, the hearthstones Thara's mother had set. No. Because you are kind? The question was suspicious because kindness had so often been used as wrapping around a hook. Because it would be theft. Thara looked down at her hands. Without tools in them, they seemed almost restless, as if emptiness itself were a problem to solve. Stronger answer. Truer one. Truth changes when hunger comes. Yes. When the child needs things. Yes. When a man grows tired of sleeping by the hearth. Elias turned to her. I have been tired for years. It hasn't made me cruel yet. The word sat between them, more revealing than he had intended. At last Thara said, The beam over the loft is cracked. That is not an answer. It is mine. If you leave, I repair it alone. If you stay, we lift it before rain. There were declarations men imagined when they were younger, full of fire and impossible certainty. Elias had grown past believing in them. This was heavier and better, a beam between them, real enough to require 2 sets of hands. I'll stay to lift it, he said. The conversation lasted long after the fire inside had gone low. They spoke with long silences between the words, and the silences were not empty, but load-bearing. She told him her father had been human-born and clan-raised, which made the registry's refusal of Orc kinship both cruel and absurd. He told her he had been apprenticed at 12, and had learned barrels before he learned accounts. She asked whether the grandmother whose name Mara carried had been kind. He said yes, though what he remembered most was his wife saying the name to her own belly, testing it like a promise. He did not tell more. Thara did not demand more. As weeks gathered, Mara's friendship with Sella grew through repetitions so small, no single one could have proved anything. Sella let her carry the empty milk pail back from the goat pen, even though it banged against her knees. She showed her which fern tips could be touched and which left a bitter oil on the skin. She taught her to whistle badly, then less badly, until Bracken began answering Mara by accident, and Mira complained that the goat now believed himself summoned by committee. Once, after rain, Mara found a drowned moth in the garden path and began to cry with a grief too large for the insect and too honest to mock. Sella knelt beside her, dug a tiny grave with a twig, and let Mara place the moth beneath a blue flower petal. Will it grow? Mara asked. No, Sella said. Then why bury it? Because small things still get a place. Elias heard that from the garden wall and had to look away. Later, when he returned to the cabin, he found Thara watching him from the porch, not asking what had opened in him, only leaving the space unfilled. Spring turned to mud. Work multiplied. Elias built a milking stool for Mara, and Thara corrected the leg angle before he fixed it. It will stand, he said. It will rock. It is a stool, not a cathedral. It will rock. She crouched beside him, set her hand over his, and shifted the joint a finger's width outward. Her palm was hot, the heel scarred, the inside smooth where handles had taught the skin patience. Here. He looked at the angle. Yes. You see. Yes. She did not move her hand for one breath too long, unless loneliness made him a bad witness. The stool did not rock. Mara stained it with berries, declared it hers and Sellers, and Bracken chewed one corner before sunset. Mira said this proved Goats recognized inferior craftsmanship. Thara said the joint angles were sound. Elias carried that praise for 2 days. Mara's next bridge came through blood. She cut her palm on a broken jar while helping too eagerly. Elias reached her too fast, knocking a stool aside, and the fear in his face frightened her more than the blood. Mira took command, washed the cut, packed it with a green paste, and wrapped it tight while Sella let Mara lean against her. "It hurts," Mara said. "Yes," Mira replied. "Make it not." "Clean first, not hurt comes after clean." "That's unfair." Most true things are. Later, when Mara slept from crying and relief, Elias went outside and split wood that did not need splitting. The axe glanced off a log and bit dirt. Before he could raise it again, Thara's hand closed around the handle below his. "Stop. I'm fine." "No." He held on. So did she. "She cut her hand," he said. "Yes. That's all." "No." He stared at the axe head in the dirt. He was no longer in the yard. He was in a small room with a basin of pink water, rosemary crushed underfoot, a blue-rimmed cup untouched on the sill, and a hand cooling in his, while another woman carried his newborn daughter away so he would not drop her. He said none of that. He said, "Elsewhere." Thara stepped closer. "Come back." The words were not soft. They were a rope thrown accurately. She took the axe from him, set it aside, and placed his right hand flat against the stacked wood. Then she covered it with her own. Bark under his palm, heat over his knuckles, rain ticking from the eaves. "Here," she said. He looked at their hands. "Here," she repeated. He nodded. When she stepped away, she did not look at his face, and that mercy nearly undid him. In early summer, a land office deputy came up the road with 2 men and a folder under his arm, which told Elias that paper had finally remembered the mountain. Thara was at the chopping block. Mira hung herbs beneath the eaves. Sella and Mara stood near the goat pen, Mara's bandaged hand held proudly against her chest. "We received notice of occupancy irregularity," the deputy said. Mira muttered, "Irregularity has boots." The deputy asked to inspect the premises. Elias stepped to the center of the yard, set down the plane he had been carrying, and said, "No inspection." "You are the deed holder?" "The registry says so." "Then you may request removal." "I am not requesting it. Orc occupation is not recognized without registered improvement filings, kinship witness, or tax record." Thara's face did not change, but Elias heard the slow breath she took. He thought of pelts sold for nails, of a circle built from ink, of cheap land paid for by people the map refused to draw. "Then register them now," he said. The deputy stared. "That is not simple. I am not asking for simple. This is a matter for the deed holder." "No," Elias said. "It is a household matter." The word household changed the clearing. Thara turned slightly toward him. Mara whispered, "Papa is using his town voice." Elias kept his tone low. "You sold me land as empty because the people here were inconvenient to your paper. That may be common. It is not true. Send forms if forms are needed. Send taxes if taxes are owed. Send a witness if your office remembers how to see. But you will not enter rooms where my daughter sleeps, and you will not measure work you refused to acknowledge as if you discovered it." The deputy left with more anger than authority. When the road took him out of sight, Mira said, "That was either clever or catastrophic." "I have been both," Elias answered. Thara looked at the board he had been smoothing before the interruption. "It will warp if left clamped." It took him a moment. Then something eased in him. "Then we should finish it." The forms arrived 2 weeks later, tied in red cord and written as if confusion were a tax. The household spent 3 evenings answering them. Elias wrote in human script. Mira dictated with legal precision. Thara supplied dates by repairs. The year the north wall failed, the spring their mother died, the winter lime replaced clay in the hearth. Sella drew a map of the spring, garden, goat pen, and cabin. Mara added bracken to the map. Mira crossed him out. Mara drew him again smaller. At the bottom of one form was a line asking relation of residence to deed holder. Elias stared at it. "Write sister for us," Mira said. "It asks relation to me. Write co-occupant if you prefer cowardice." Thara sat across from him with firelight on her hands, calm in the way a brace is calm while holding a roof. "What should I write?" Elias asked. Mara looked up from the floor. "Can't you write maybe husband?" The quill made a blot. Mira covered her eyes. "This child will topple a magistrate someday by asking where he left his soul." Elias set the quill down. His heart moved slowly, like a mill wheel starting after ice. The form will not accept maybe. "Custom does not require paperwork," Mira said. "No, but paperwork seems determined to require custom." Thara's voice was low. "Do not write what you do not choose." "I know. Do you?" Outside, rain tapped the shutters. Elias thought of choice. For years he had mistaken not wanting for wisdom, because wanting opened doors, grief had closed for good reason. Need was easier. Need said feed the child, mend the coat, keep walking. Want asked whether living was meant to be more than not dying. He picked up the quill. "Mira," he said, "what is the formal term?" Mira watched him closely. "Hearth husband. In clan speech, Vardun, the man who stands under the roof by chosen weight." Elias looked at Thara. "Have you named me?" This time she did not hide the fear. It moved across her face like weather over stone. "I name you hearth husband if you choose to stand." Mira looked at Sella. Sella nodded once. Mira sighed, but gently. "Unrefused." Mara whispered, "That means yes." Human paper had no space for the whole weight of it, but paper rarely did. Elias wrote slowly, "Hearth husband by household claim." His hand did not shake until after the ink dried. No one embraced. Thara added a log to the fire, though the room was already warm. Mira checked the forms for errors with ferocious attention. Sella took Mara outside to see whether rain had flooded the garden channels, though both of them were smiling too hard for true concern. Elias remained at the table until Thara returned and placed a small iron hook near his hand. "For your tools by the door," she said. "You made this before tonight?" "Yes." "How long before?" "A while." He did not make too much of it. He only asked where it should go. She showed him beside the coat hooks, below the shelf where wet gloves dried. He marked the holes. She stood close, then closer. "Angle upward," she said. "Weight pulls down." He adjusted. Not that much. Her hand came over his to guide the all-point. Mara whispered behind them, "Are they doing husband work?" "Apparently husband work involves holes in walls," Mira replied. Elias closed his eyes for one breath. Thara's hand remained over his. When he opened them, he asked, "Here, here," Thara said. The awl went in straight. Summer came, and the cabin changed by increments. Elias built a second workbench beneath the lean-to. Sella's foolish flowers opened blue and white in the garden, and Mara visited them each morning like a priestess of small miracles. Mira's shelves filled with jars labeled in both scripts, because Mara had asked why human letters got to stand alone. Thara repaired the porch boards, but left one familiar creak, because, she said, total silence invited foolishness. The ring stayed on Elias's finger until midsummer. Then, one night, he placed it in the small wooden box that held the faded blue thread from the rosemary bundle and a lock of Mara's baby hair. He did not make a ceremony of it. Grief did not leave because a ring came off. Love did not vanish because life made room. The dead were not doors closed from one side. They were foundations, hidden and load-bearing. And sometimes the living had to build without asking the foundation to become the whole house. In the morning, Thara noticed the bare finger. She said nothing. At noon, she handed him a leather cord with 3 knots. "For your wrist." "What does it mean?" "Work accepted. Not marriage, not mourning, just work." "Did you make it?" "Celebrated. Mira chose the knots. I cut the leather." 3 sisters. "Yes." He tied it around his wrist, over the pale line where the ring had been. Thara looked satisfied in a way too small for anyone else to see. The most important moment between them would not have looked important to anyone who expected raised voices. It came near the end of summer, while rain pressed on the roof, and Mara slept by the hearth. The table leg had been wrong since Elias arrived, twisted just enough that cups drifted toward the fireside. He turned the table over to fix it. Thara crouched opposite him. "Now?" she asked. "It has annoyed me for 8 months. It annoyed me for 6 years. Then why not fix it?" "I fixed the roof first." "Reasonable." They loosened the peg and tested the old joint. The underside of the table was scarred with knife marks, burn marks, and the small cuts of children who had once hidden beneath it. Elias shaved the tenon, tested, shaved again. Thara let him work without correcting too soon. "A little inward," she said at last. He shifted the leg. Less. He shifted less. "There." The peg rolled near his knee. Thara reached for it and moved closer than necessary. Her shoulder pressed against his chest. Not brushed. Pressed. She could have moved away after taking the peg. He could have leaned back. Neither did. The cabin grew very quiet around that small refusal. Her hair smelled of rain and cedar smoke. Her hand covered his where he held the joint. His grief did not vanish. It made space, reluctantly, like an old wall accepting a new beam because the roof needed holding. Thara's thumb moved once over his knuckle, a question made of pressure. Elias did not move away. She drove the peg with the heel of her hand. The joint locked. From the loft, Mira's voice drifted down. "If the table collapses, I am blaming romance." Elias laughed. Not almost, not politely. A real laugh, rough from disuse, startling every beam in the room. Thara looked at him and smiled fully for the first time. It did not make her softer. It made visible the warmth that had been banked inside her all along, waiting for trust to give it air. Mara stirred, mumbled, "No collapsing," and slept again. Autumn brought frost and harvest. They pulled beans, onions, bitter greens, and 3 small carrots Mara declared heroic. The tax notice arrived lower than expected and still offensive. They paid it together, coin from Elias, pelts and herbs from the sisters, repair work from Thara. The forms were still not finished, but there was enough ink from enough offices that removal became less likely than bureaucracy tiring of itself. One cold morning Elias woke before dawn to find the fire low. He rose to feed it, but Thara came from the shadow in a heavy shawl, hair loose around her shoulders. "You let it go low," she said. "I was getting to it." She shifted the log 1/2 inch with the poker. "Air under. Fire needs a throat." "I know. You forgot." "I did." They watched the flames rise. He had been shaping a question for days, planing it down and pretending it was only thought. "When winter comes," he said, "the hearth corner will be colder." "Yes." "The loft is crowded." "Yes." "I could build a sleeping alcove off the back wall." Thara looked at him. "For you and Mara." "For whoever needs it." "Coward answer." He breathed out. "For us, if you want." The fire moved over her face. She stepped closer until her shawl brushed his sleeve. "Build it strong." It was not yes in the human way. It was instruction, acceptance, a future requiring measurements. I will check the joints. I would expect nothing less." Her hand found his wrist, fingers resting over the 3 knots. She did not kiss him. He did not reach for more than the moment could hold. She stood beside him until the cold withdrew from the window. The alcove took 3 weeks. Elias built the frame, Thara shaped the braces, Sella wove reed panels, Mira mixed a sealant that smelled like punishment and worked perfectly. Mara hammered one low peg and named it the monster peg, because monsters, she said, tried low places first. Mira wrote monster peg beside it in tiny human letters. Thara carved the orc rune for stubborn beneath. When the first snow returned, the alcove held. A narrow bed fit inside, with a trundle for Mara beneath it. Thara brought a folded blanket from her own chest, dark red and brown, worn thin at one edge, and mended many times. "That was your mother's," Sella said from the doorway, then looked stricken. Thara did not rebuke her. "Yes." Elias touched the blanket's edge. He understood the size of the offering, because he had his own boxes. "We'll keep it safe." "No." Thara said, "Use it." So they did. That first night, Mara whispered from the trundle, "Is Thara your wife now?" In her custom, "I am husband to the house." "That's not what I asked." "It is the answer I have." "Do you love her?" The question found him in the dark, without tools. Through the reed panel he could see Thara's shadow near the hearth, lifting 2 cups for morning. "I am learning what it is," he said. Mara was quiet, then murmured, "I think she knows. She knows everything that is crooked." He smiled in the dark. "That she does." Winter settled around them, stern but no longer unfamiliar. The woodpile reached the eaves. The roof held. The door closed cleanly over the threshold he and Thara had repaired. Mara's height mark gained another line because she insisted she had grown in her sleep. Sella's flower seeds waited in a pouch by the window. Mira complained that human joints were inferior in damp weather, including her own. The household mark Thara carved above the inner door showed 3 roof lines joined over a central flame, and Elias touched it once when no one watched. The ending, if it was an ending, came on an ordinary evening with snow falling thick beyond the glass. Mara slept against Bracken's warm side, because the goat had been allowed inside during the cold, and accepted the honor with suspicious dignity. Sella mended a mitten by the fire. Mira had gone to the loft after declaring everyone's breathing too loud. Elias came in from the shed and set a repaired stool beside the door. Thara tested it with one hand and nodded. "Good," she said. "High praise. Do not become weak from it. I'll brace myself." She moved to the hooks by the door. Her coat hung there, dark with melted snow. His hung beside it. Mara's small coat hung below. Mira's satchel, Sella's scarf, his tool roll on the iron hook she had made before naming him. The wall was crowded in the way living walls should be, full of things belonging to people who meant to return. Thara lifted a second coat from the bench, one she had mended for him in secret, though the square stitches gave her away, and hung it on the spare peg above his boots. "For morning," she said. "Your human coat is thin." He touched the sleeve. "Thara." She glanced at him. He realized he had never said her name that way before, bare of question or need or warning, just her name, placed carefully between them. He said it again, quieter. "Thara." The fire shifted. Sella smiled down at the mitten. Mara slept on. Outside, snow erased the path to the road, but inside there were 2 cups on the table, steam rising from both. And Elias took off his thin old coat, hung it beneath the warmer one, and did not reach for the door.